Porting games forward and cleaning up the edges has been part of the video game industry for a long time as a way to keep classic titles alive. After all, video game preservation is a very important subject. How come one can find super duper Blu-ray re-releases of the most average 1950s movies, and yet we all pine for 20-year-old classic games to be released from consoles that aren't manufactured anymore? This list will focus on games that are right there waiting and pleading for a remaster, and yet developers and publishers seem to be turning a blind eye to them. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 obvious video game remasters that the industry is ignoring. Number 10. Bully. In 2006, Rockstar released Bully to positive reviews. It was a bold proposition, siphoning the studio's style into a really unique setting, taking GTA's criminal empire into a morally grey school where players aim to make peace with warring cliques and rise to the top of the system. Many reports point out that Rockstar had thought about Bully for a long time after its release, apparently working on a sequel years later, for around 18 months behind the scenes, but nothing ever came of it. It seems strange that the fledgling franchise has therefore seemingly fallen into the role of being one of the studio's most overlooked properties. Outside of its non-Grand Theft Auto output, at the very least Red Dead Redemption got a sequel and 2011's LA Noire got a remaster in recent years. In comparison, Bully got a port to mobile devices in 2016, but otherwise remains locked on the hardware of the era. As one of the biggest studios in gaming today, it's surprising that Rockstar doesn't continue to push forward its previous successes, especially the refreshingly different tone of Bully. Even if it never gets a sequel, leaving Bully trapped in the past seems counterintuitive to a studio that sometimes needs to prove that it's more than just GTA Online. Number 9. Metroid Prime. Samus Aran's jump to the first-person perspective with Metroid Prime totally changed the franchise, allowing it to pursue two totally different styles. Both the 2D and 3D Metroid games have had their fair share of critical success. Since the reveal of Metroid Prime 4 in 2017, the speculation has begun about the return of the original Prime games, with the first two released on the GameCube and then packaged together with the third on the Wii as Metroid Prime Trilogy. It would be easy for Nintendo to treat the collection much like they have done the entire franchise in the past, that is, to conveniently forget about it. But the Metroid series is in a better place right now than it has been in some time, in large part due to the 3DS title Samus Returns and Metroid Dread for the Switch. Every E3 or Nintendo Direct that rolls around is usually joined by wishlists and rumours that Metroid Prime might finally land on the Nintendo Switch eShop. Prime 4 will almost certainly be the kind of standalone story that can be enjoyed by gamers new and old, whether they've played the original games or not, but surely giving everyone the opportunity to revisit the series' history would be great marketing. Just as long as you don't go the Mario route and make it a timed exclusive, eh Nintendo? Number 8. Jet Set Radio. In order to give the Dreamcast something unique, Sega wanted to craft a game that reflected Japanese pop culture of the time. Thus, the graffiti tagging roller skating wild ride that was Jet Set Radio was brought into being. In 2022, Jet Set Radio sits at an interesting crossroads of other games, with obvious ties to Nintendo's Splatoon IP, as well as the trick-based Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which recently had its own nostalgic return with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remake. There is space in the modern gaming world for Jet Set Radio, especially with its unabashed, colourful, in-your-face 90s attitude. Any game with a non-contemporary art style is sure to age better than those trying to be realistic, and even just a little work would bring Jet Set Radio's early cel-shaded style up to a certain amount of modern expectation. But imagine how great a modern reskin of Tokyo-To could look and sound. AAA gaming could always do with titles that are a little less serious and a lot more bright and bizarre. Whilst Jet Set Radio has a hell of a legacy already, if marketed correctly, it could really connect with an audience that is always hungry for releases that look like a throwback and play like a silky smooth dream. Number 7. Resident Evil. The first 3 number titles of the Resident Evil series were all released for the original PlayStation and together tell the amazing arc of the T-Virus outbreak that leads to the destruction of Raccoon City. Zooming out, they also tell the tale of video gaming taking its first big steps into cinematic storytelling and high production values. You'd think a franchise as massive as Resident Evil would take care of its originals, but that's not necessarily the case. Now, naturally, the 2019 and 2020 reimaginings of Resident Evil 2 and 3 are superb. However, they cannot and should not outright replace the originals, and there's no reason for them to do so. The modern takes on RE2 and RE3 are so much of a departure from their late 90s counterparts that it really could be a have your cake and eat it too kind of situation for Capcom. Admittedly, the 96 Resident Evil is available on PlayStation's Plus Premium service, but what the series truly deserves is a triple pack. Whilst the games are clunky by nature, die-hard fans have shown just how great they can look with a lick of paint with the likes of the seamless HD mod projects. Letting these titles fade into the past is not only leaving money on the table, but would be a horrifying way to let classic titles be forgotten about in the future. Number 6. Jak and Daxter. As an ode to Naughty Dog's stellar past, several of their IP have been re-released in recent years as loving packages, namely the Nathan Drake Collection and Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy. The latter of these was especially so well received that it even finally spawned Crash Bandicoot 4. But between those franchises, Naughty Dog released another trilogy that is highly underrated and all too often overlooked. Where is the Jak and Daxter Trilogy collection? Well, admittedly the answer to that is on the PS3 and Vita, as the games have been brought forward to an extent, but the Jak and Daxter collection was really just a bit of spitshine to bring the games up to the early days of HD. The Jak and Daxter series is often not recognised for the great things it did at the time. The first game introduced a deep, explorable hub world to Naughty Dog's platforming style, and then the sequels wildly bounced off in their own directions. In the intervening years, fans have pined for something more, with some even going so far as to toy with their own stunning reworking of the precursor legacy, proving that there's money and smiles to be made by a new Jak and Daxter collection. And if it springboards into a new game, well, hard to be mad about that. Number 5. Vagrant Story. During the era of the original PlayStation, Squaresoft were firing on all cylinders. Whilst they're responsible for some of the most recognisable titles on the system, this means that some releases are overlooked despite being as solid as the most famous Final Fantasy games. Vagrant Story was a huge success both nationally and worldwide, with Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu awarding the title a perfect score, making it the only PlayStation game to ever do so. This overlooked gem is a thrilling tactical RPG dungeon crawler with remarkable 3D visuals for the time and an immersive socio-political story. The game's deep weapon system is a particular strength, with each piece of equipment gaining advantages and disadvantages depending on how the player uses them over time. Even today, Square Enix haven't totally forgotten about Vagrant Story, with references included in FF14's 2017 expansion Stormblood, but mostly this asks the question, why is such a beloved title resigned to mere winks and nods these 2 decades later? Vagrant Story deserves a lot more than cheap ports across the PlayStation Store, and an HD version of Valendia would be a wonderful return to a time when Square could do no wrong. Number 4. Eternal Darkness, SANITY'S Requiem. In 2004, Silicon Knights released a mostly unexpected GameCube exclusive by the name of Eternal Darkness, SANITY'S Requiem. It was not only a great survival horror title, but surprised and shocked every player who got their hands on it. A core gameplay mechanic is the Sanity Meter, which, as it drops, sees the world twist and bend in strange ways. Eventually, Eternal Darkness breaks the fourth wall and messes with the sanity of the player too, by teleporting them around the map and simulating glitches. Thankfully, the spirit of the video game community has kept Eternal Darkness alive in some fashion because it's never ever been brought outside of its GameCube captivity. Most likely, if you've never played it before, you'll at least be aware of it because of various lists and content creators who love to point it out as an example of a game that really broke the mould. Could a sequel take some of the shine off? Perhaps, but at the very least it deserves to be brought to modern systems so that the allure of the GameCube horror title doesn't become the mystique of a game that ultimately became impossible to play thanks to bad video game preservation. Number 3. Red Dead Redemption. As part of Red Dead Redemption 2, players can visit the location of New Austin from the first game. In the distance is the Nuevo Paraíso portion of Mexico, almost completely modelled, with some sneaky players having managed to explore it via glitches. This and data-mined unused files almost imply that it was planned to be visitable in the game, which added fuel to the fire of the belief that Red Dead Redemption was being brought forwards to the current generation. However, it's been nearly 4 years and all is quiet on the Western Front. Red Dead Redemption 2 was a huge moment in gaming, and as great as the original game is, its sequel was such a massive step forward in creating a hyper-real version of the Old West. Considering the two game stories and locations bump up so close together, it almost feels like a missed opportunity not bringing the original game closer in line with RDR2, at the very least graphically, if not mechanically. For those that want to shift more organically from one story to the other, a remaster of the first game could sharpen the edges and shave off the old age to make the duology feel smoother than ever before. Number 2. F-Zero. Whilst the original F-Zero on the SNES was a game changer that really showed the power of the console's Mode 7, it's the later games in the series that brought the futuristic racer into its own. X for the Nintendo 64 and GX for the GameCube were both commercial successes, which is why the franchise going dormant seems so unreal. In a May 2022 interview with GamesBeat, former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé said that, in his experience, the company never explicitly drops a franchise, they just merely wait until they find an idea that works to push something forward. But it's been 3 home console generations since we last saw F-Zero. Perhaps reinvention isn't necessary. Starving fans of Captain Falcon and Company merely would like a single drop of water at this point, even if that's a remaster or a re-release. With the Nintendo Switch being designed to be played on the go or at home and being so couch co-op friendly, simply bringing F-Zero X or GX back would be a hit. It would be a good way to gauge the interest in a new installment and could inspire developers to actually pursue an idea for the IP rather than just wait until something comes along that merely fits. After all, the best-selling Switch title is Mario Kart 8, so the console has an established install base who are interested in fun, gimmicky-based races. Number 1. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Whilst science fiction is a mainstay genre and style of gaming, fantasy often has peaks and valleys of interest. Elden Ring is a recent example of a great dark fantasy world that had massive appeal, and in its wake other games can follow. New IPs, but also returning beloved icons. There was always something intangibly other about Legacy of Kain, and the Soul Reaver subseries in particular. It had such a unique setting and look, drawing from gothic aesthetics as well as a sense of post-apocalypse. Its protagonist didn't look like your typical hero, a resurrected vampire general who stood out amongst even the truly wild designs of the 1990s. The Kain series burned brightly for a mere 6 years between its first and final release, and Soul Reaver in particular felt stylistically way ahead of its time. With Embracer Group acquiring the rights to the series amidst a large purchase of Square Enix assets, they expressed interest in more installments or remakes. Whilst this might be empty platitudes, it seems well worth the investment of a remaster or a remake of Soul Reaver in particular. Its combination of sturdy hack-and-slash combat and truly interesting puzzle design that centres on interacting with 2 different planes of existence, Soul Reaver feels more than ever like a title that fits into the gaming zeitgeist. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and which of these video games would you most like to see get that coveted re-release. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.